Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Artaby. I'm the Associate Director for Work Life and Human Resources. We work very closely with the folks at the Cornell Wellness Program and the Faculty and Staff Assistance Program to offer workshops and programs related to employee well-being. Those of you that have not been in this building before, the restrooms are just outside the store right next to the elevators. It's of highest importance, of course. We have some information about our programs and services and some flyers at the table. In the weekly email that goes out to all employees, pay attention to the one that comes next week. I mean, of course, pay attention to all of them, but pay attention to the one that comes out next week, because we're going to be featuring a new booklet that we've developed on employee well-being at Cornell, summarizing all the different programs and resources that are available. Today's presentation on managing compassion fatigue and burnout is being presented by Makenzie Peterson, Director of Wellness at the College of Vet Medicine. Makenzie received her Master of Science in Health Promotion and Education. She's also delivering a program for us titled Aligning Our Values, Finding Meaning in Our Work on January 9th from 9 to 10 a.m. That one will be by Zoom only. And for our online folks, when Makenzie takes questions from the in-person audience, she's going to repeat the question back so that the microphone picks it up. And folks that have questions online, please just submit them using the chat or the Q&A features, and I will facilitate asking them, me being Michelle. And then the recording will be sent out in the next day or two. If anyone in person, online, or those that missed it today would like to share it with anyone. So with that, I'm going to turn this microphone over to Makenzie.
Thank you so much. Let's see if I can get this just right on the shirt. Last time I tried this, my hair got all over the place and it was like all over. So thank you so much for being here, folks in person, those who are on Zoom. So we're going to be talking today about strategies of managing compassion fatigue and burnout. And as Michelle kind of said, a little bit about me. This is my sweet, handsome boy, Odin. He's the love of my life. But yes, I did my undergrad and my grad in health promotion and health education with a focus on international health initially, and eventually went on and I worked in Boston for 6.5 years. I did contract work for Harvard Medical School and Harvard School of Public Health, and focused a lot on actually sexual violence prevention work. Realized I was gonna get burned out doing really heavy work. And so I realized I wanted to go back and do more generalization again. But of course, working with the AAVMC Veterinary Mental Health Professionals Group, I'm the vice chair for them. And then of course, being the Wellbeing Program Director at the Cornell's College of Veterinary Medicine. Do a lot of compassion fatigue and burnout discussions, conflict resolution, general well-being, but we cover a lot of wonderful things. So it's really great that we're there at the vet school. Oop. There we go. Okay, I know that I have to point this now very intentionally. So of course, our learning objectives today, we're going to review compassion fatigue and burnout. We're going to identify the signs, symptoms, and risk factors for both. And we're going to discuss prevention and management strategies. Okay, so how do they differ? This is kind of the big thing that folks are like, I feel like I'm experiencing this, but maybe I'm experiencing that, and nothing's really matching up, right? So when it comes to compassion fatigue, this results more from the relationship between you and the work that you're actually doing. When it comes to burnout, burnout is more about your environment. You're feeling a disconnect from the environment that you're in, whether that's you feel like there's a lack of flexible work scheduling for you, really poor interpersonal relationships with the people that you work with, or maybe with your supervisor. This emerges over time, and maybe if you go to a new environment, a burnout might shift away. That might dissipate with a new environment. With compassion fatigue, this is more connected to finding meaning in the work that you do. Does that meaning go away now? Are you, like when we talk to our veterinarians, it's more around, I used to really find enjoyment and passion in helping and saving animals. I don't feel that passion anymore for it. I'm feeling a disconnect from the work. And so when it comes to compassion fatigue, that may follow you to the next job. So it's one thing that we really work on managing now, so that if we do decide to move to another position or move to another field or another role, we want to still keep that. And of course, those who care for dying patients are at risk for both. So if you work in hospice care, if you're working in health profession field, you can be at risk for a lot of these things. So the risk factors for distress, I'm actually going to move over here because I think I'm closer to this thing connecting if I'm over here. So of course, one thing is no boundaries. You're working during your time off all the time. You're always on call. You're always connected. Your phone is always there. You're always checking it. You're overly flexible with your schedule. You're always saying yes. No isn't really in your vocabulary as much. And I think there's a lot of pressure to say yes, right? We feel a lot of pressure that that's what we have to do. And so another thing is isolation. If you're spending limited amounts of time with people, with your personal relationships, that you have too much, I apologize, you're going to hear a lot about clinic time. Because when you're working in the clinics with a lot of our 24/7 staff that we have, you know, that is going to be the time that you're always constantly doing a medical task. And you're not going to be so much connected to what is the outcome, what is the personal thing that's happening. And so when you come in and you see the happy family who's so happy that their sweet puppy is saved, but you're in the back doing the surgery or doing this, it's more of a technical skill that you're not able to see the fruits of your efforts. And so there's some folks who I think in other different roles around the university, they're like, I feel like I do this paperwork, this is how this goes, and I don't get to see any fruits of where this is going, where it's happening, what's this about? I don't feel a connection to my work anymore, and I'm not sure what difference do I make in this. So that's one thing that we can see. Other risk factors are working too much. You have too many of the same people, same type of people in a row all the time. It's singular work, kind of how I mentioned before, and you don't have any time off. You work with difficult people frequently or all the time. Unhealthy coping mechanisms, alcohol, drugs, food, internet, escapism, a lot of things that we do that are not great coping behaviors. The unrealistic expectations that you believe you should be invincible. You should be able to do all this. And even worse, the comparison of, well, other people have it worse, so I should be fine. Why can't I just be happy that I do this? And that could be really, that bargaining can be really demoralizing. And also it's, comparison is a thief of everything. And also it doesn't address the issue of why we're actually feeling a little empty, right? So we compare ourselves to all of our shoulds. So some of the symptoms and signs of burnout, you're going to see a lot of emotional exhaustion. We'll see this compared to compassion fatigue, that there is one major singular difference that you'll see. So of course, a sense of ineffectiveness or dissatisfaction with your work, the cynicism and detachment. My apologies, I didn't do my mouth exercises this morning. Poor sleep, difficulty concentrating, the poor judgment. Social withdrawal, your interpersonal conflicts really start to increase more and more. The addictive, self-medicating behavior, the not trauma related. So this is the part that's going to be very different when we talk about compassion fatigue. And when we talk to compassion fatigue, I'll talk more about that. And of course, if you have burnout, you're more likely to make your errors. You're more likely, especially if you're working in a medical environment, or if you're working with maybe high risk folks, if you're working with major donors that like everything feels a little bit more high pressure, you're more likely to make some errors. So when we talk about the stages of burnout, of course, we all start out super excited. We're gung-ho. We're so ready for this. We're like, yes, I'm in this new job. I'm starting this new environment. This is so fun. You have a really good feeling of optimism about this. Then you're going to get to this stagnation place. You're kind of going to get to the rhythm. You're like, okay, I get this. Like, I know how my work goes. I'm not feeling as challenged as much anymore, but it's okay. You know, trying to handle anything harder doesn't really seem to come up as much, but you're feeling fine. And you start to actually feel a sense of disappointment that high you were feeling when you started isn't continuing. And then you're going to feel this sense of frustration, a sense of powerlessness, which I think if you feel a sense of powerlessness, or that your input or connection isn't really involved in the decision making, that can really lead to also, aside from burnout, to spaces of more passive aggressive behavior. And so you're not seeing the visible payoff of your efforts. And that can feel extremely discouraging, leads you to feel incompetent, might make you feel inadequate. And then hits this apathy stage, where you're hitting despair and disillusionment. You're like, this job wasn't all what they told me it would be, or maybe it was, but we had a lot of excitement, right? And so you start to see no way out of your situation, and you become resigned and indifferent. There's one thing, our director of HR at the vet school has a really great phrase that I love. She's like, you know, I'm concerned about the people who quit and leave. She's like, but even more concerned about the people who quit and stay. She's like, I'm really not sure what to do. So that employee engagement piece is really valuable in this apathy phase. And so it's right here in this space right here of apathy that you can choose. A lot of people seem to stay. Folks can stay in this apathy stage and just be like, well, whatever, I'm here, I got good benefits, I'll just put in my time, like, I'm fine. Check, check. Not everyone loves their job, so I don't have to either. And that's That's not good, right? We don't like that anymore. So you can stay in this space, or you can hit this intervention space where you're going to take this and you're going to really actively engage in how you can get yourself out of this burnout phase, out of this compassion fatigue phase. And of course, another sign of all of this is your physical, mental, emotional exhaustion increasing as you keep going. So compassion fatigue, personal compassion fatigue, affects many, many dimensions of your well-being. This is when we talk about the trauma relation, this can be a part of it, right? Your nervous system is totally kind of on fire. Gets really disrupted. The emotional intensity increases, your cognitive ability decreases, so you're having emotion lizard brain is like on high, and like frontal cortex, high level thinking on low. Behavior and judgment's impaired. The isolation and loss of morale. Yes, please keep doing that. It's a lot of sun coming in. Yes, go to town. The depression and the PTSD, we're gonna start lowering some blinds, y'all. You're like, I love you, just not right here. Yeah, I know, it was like in Ithaca, the sun, just not right now. So the depression and the PTSD is another piece of this. What we've seen in folks who experience compassion fatigue is that they may be in a space where, you know, they're having an interpersonal conflict with either a supervisor or a colleague, and they'll come into the office and they'll be like, and the intensity just increases. The emotional is going up and down, and it's around, they yell at me just like how my father yelled at me when I was a kid. So things start to feel really triggering. They start to really feel traumatic again. Those people that you're like, oh, like maybe they annoy me, but I can manage that, I can deal with that. Suddenly now those folks who annoy you, man, you're having like murder thoughts at that point, right? Like you're like, okay, now I can't handle them at all. Now I just want them out of my life. And so then you start to avoid them entirely rather than working with them. So that's where the compassion fatigue can be a part of this too. The substance use and of course the compulsive behavior is another part of this. Your identity and your worldview, you feel really this space of feeling spiritually impacted, that's where the compassion fatigue and the burnout differs. PTSD, trauma, your entire worldview, is what I'm doing even matters? What's the point? The depression can really increase to not just, I really don't enjoy my work, but I like going home to my family, to, does my family even like find me valuable? If I'm not feeling valued at work, do I feel valuable at home? It starts to really enmesh into more spaces of your life. So your psychological needs feel impacted. You don't feel psychologically safe at work. You don't feel a sense of trust. You don't feel valued, appreciated. Your sense of control and your self-esteem is impacted. The loss of hope in meeting, an existential sense of existential despair, and of course, the chronic physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. So of course, we can feel that, we can experience compassion fatigue personally, but we also experience it on organizational levels. An organization can be experiencing compassion fatigue. And of course, I mean, I think every person throughout their entire career has probably worked at this place, right? Where they're like, oh, I remember working at that organization that had this thing. High absenteeism, constant changes in the workers' relationships, inabilities for teams to work well together, desire among staff members to break the company rules, inability of staff to complete assignments and tasks. They don't respect or meet deadlines. Outbreaks of aggressive behavior, a lack of flexibility. When it hits that point where it's like, you know what, I'm just looking out for me. I'm clocking in, I'm clocking out. Don't ask me to stay another 15 minutes. Like, this is my time. I'm not doing anymore. You know, like that's sort of lack of flexibility. But that comes from generally a historical amount of feeling undervalued and underappreciated. So it's a passive aggressive approach that comes from feeling a sense of lack of power, lack of control. So it's an understandable space, but the manifestation of it tends to be really toxic. Excessive negativism, strong reluctance towards change. And once again, that usually comes from a space of feeling that any attempts to change didn't work, or you tried and it got shot down. So there's a lot of that. Inability for staff to believe that improvement's possible, and feeling a lack of vision for the future. So when we see this is generally what we're seeing for a lot of folks, right? We're seeing this space where they start out in work where they're like, okay, because not all stress is bad, right? Not all stress is, some stress is super wonderful, and we want that. Because if you have no stress, you're totally inactive, you're super bored. You don't want any of this. And then the more you feel challenged, actually the more your performance increases. And then you have a peak performance space for you where the stress level and the performance is like prime, right? It's hitting all the right spots. You are feeling just challenged enough. You're feeling engaged enough. Your performance is like awesome. But then you hit a space where if you're feeling overworked, too many hours, too much going on, feeling undervalued, underappreciated, this stress starts to push past beyond your threshold of your performance. So some people will be like, oh, well, I mean, this person used to perform so well, but I guess they stopped caring. And I'm like, they stopped caring or they're too stressed? Because that's two different things, right? Because then you hit this point of burnout, breakdown, you start to feel sick, the physical exhaustion and emotional exhaustion. Okay. Come on, you. There we go. Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of exercise right now, and I hope that folks are willing to participate. But are you aware of any of these contributing issues or contributing factors in your workday? You're going to see a lot of medical photos. I apologize, but you're going to see a lot of cute cat photos later. There's bonuses to the vet school. So the ability to perform is interfered with or limited. The situations don't seem typical or ordinary anymore. They start to feel traumatic. This person came and asked you a question that they probably asked you the same question every month for the past year, but for some reason this time you're like, why can't you just give me a minute? Or why do you keep asking me this? Like suddenly it just feels traumatic, right? The compassion stress breaks through your normal boundaries. You're able to be really nice, but for some reason, like boom, like you are angry really quickly, you're sad really quickly. A lot of those, your emotion regulation is really disrupted. You're waking up tired and regularly struggling to get to work. You're feeling as if you're working harder but accomplishing less. A lot of folks have been feeling that way. They're like, I just work harder and harder and I feel like I'm not getting anywhere. Feeling frustrated, you're easily irritated, losing compassion for some folks while becoming overly involved in other people that you're working with. Routinely feeling bored or disgusted, experiencing the illness, the aches, and the pains. And everyone's kind of like, yep, I think I've been there before, right? So what type of cases or what type of instances really push your compassion fatigue buttons? This is open to online and in the room. What are the situations that really push your buttons? The last group I did this for was faculty, staff, and students at the vet school, and I had a lot of staff who said, honestly, when I feel like my supervisor doesn't listen to what I have to say or doesn't make me feel valued. That was a big thing. Especially if it felt continuous, right? Like it wasn't just one instance, like no, I feel continually that I'm not valued or appreciated, or that my voice isn't wanted in discussions that impact me. What are things? Uh-huh.
Or, you know, like this one guy, okay, and I knew that he did not hear what I was saying, and he was going to be coming back to me, you know, like
the next week.
Day.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do I fill out? Where is this form? How do I do this? You know?
Feeling like you're repeating the same questions over and over and over again, and no one's listening to you. Yeah, definitely. That's exhausting. Feeling like a broken record. Absolutely. What else? Yeah, let's hear it.
Constant interruptions.
Yeah. Yeah, those are
last minute
ones.
Requests from faculty well past the deadline.
Yeah.
The volume of students needing support this semester.
Yeah, I feel like that volume increases all the time, right? Every semester. I don't know if we could honestly offer enough supports, right? I don't know if we could offer enough to satisfy everyone. It's a huge undertaking. But what else? Yeah.
I think that because there's such an increase of having to just react.
Yeah.
No time to no time to be proactive, trying to get out in front of things.
Yeah.
Figure out how to do things differently.
Yeah, there's no time for strategic planning or proactive planning. Yeah. Now that can feel extremely exhausting when you feel like you're always in crisis mode and you're always in response mode. You're like, we're always responding to a problem rather than getting ahead of our problems. Yeah.
Or you have put something in place and you think that you figured out absolutely everything, even hand them a piece of paper and they come back the next day and question.
Yeah.
It's almost like the work that you do becomes like this matter.
Yeah. It's not being utilized.
They want to be
Yeah. Yeah. Feeling that there's maybe, how do I describe that? Maybe a lack of self-initiative when it comes to being handed resources and people not wanting to read the resources. They prefer maybe a face-to-face, like walk me through it, rather than like, I don't have time for every walkthrough. Let me give you some resources and encouraging people to go be adults, which can be difficult. Because there's times I think we all need that, we all need that hand-holding at sometimes in our lives, but there's times where you're like, no, baby bird, out of the nest, bye.
Yeah, an individual that says it's so hard to get things done at Cornell. It can seem like the simplest thing can take days to work through. And I would say we have a joke about that.
Big red tape.
It's called big red tape.
Big red tape.
Not having enough time to get a good job, to do a good job because you just have to get tasks done and move on to the next thing. So lots of different comments are coming in right now. I won't repeat them all.
Yeah.
But, very powerful.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of those. I mean, I know that for me, it's every decision being made by a committee. I'm just like, oh man. And I feel like there's times where I want to move so fast. I'm like, yeah, let's do the thing. And then next thing I know, it's like, well, did we run that by so-and-so? And I'm like, oh man. And then it's like, okay, well, let's schedule that meeting a month from now. And then that has to be discussed maybe 2 weeks later. And then it's like and I'm just like, we could have had that done like last year. And so I think it's running on quote unquote academic time that can feel really exhausting for me sometimes, especially if you've been like in academia or out of academia. If you hopped in and out, you kind of see the speed that can happen in other spaces. But also I think there's value to that committee communal onboarding, right? Anyone else before we go on? Yeah. The situations where it's not your fault, but it becomes your problem, yes. Where you can't sit there and say, I just want to pass this off to the right person, or like, I think this person can just take this thing. You're like, no, wow, I really do have to deal with this, don't I? Yeah, that's never a fun thing. I've had to be in that role numerous times. Okay. So this is one thing where you have to acknowledge the things that actually do push our buttons, right? So what can we do on an individual level? I know that we had a discussion about organizational level, but for this presentation, we're going to focus on individual level. So one is assessment. We need to know what our baseline is, and we need to know where we're at in those intense moments. There's a couple different self-screenings that you can do. The professional quality of life assessment. That's one that works really great through the AVMA. The mental health self-screening, the Mental Health National Association, if you go to this link, there is a huge, huge page of, do you want a self-assessment for PTSD? Do you want a self-assessment for a sleep disorder? Do you want a self-assessment for like anything and everything? So it's massive. Bipolar disorder, like everything you can. And I want to be clear, these self-evaluation tests are not meant to be diagnostic. They are meant to be something that you can help generate a conversation with a mental health provider, with a PCP. Like these are just meant to be conversation starters that maybe you have with a trusted friend or with a spouse. So, but this is also just for you to have some self-reflection about like, I scored a little bit higher on that than I thought I would. Maybe I need to talk to someone, right? And then also the National Wellness Institute does a holistic lifestyle assessment. This one's much longer. This is about 90 questions. So it covers all the different aspects of your well-being, and it probably would take like an hour and a half to complete. So if you were interested in that, just set aside some time to actually do it. If you give yourself a minute a question. Of course, yeah. I mean, you can take a picture too. Either way. I mean, the link, oh, there we go. Do the links right here. But yeah, it's I know that these slides are going to be available for everyone as far as like you can watch the recording and everything. Feel free to take the photo, no worries. And you can also Google these as well too. Okay. So there's also the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So when you talk about the back to the basics. I know that for some folks, it's like, we've had a wheel, we've had a pyramid, we've had like a bunch of things at Cornell. And for the premise of this one, I'm actually going to use our pyramid to hit a visual point here for this one. Because when we talk about compassion fatigue and burnout, when we talk about feeling super, super stressed, what are the first things we ditch? Sleeping well, eating well, time for ourselves to decompress. Because we immediately just are like, well, those are my things that I need, and I can sacrifice the things I need to get the things done, right? So that's unfortunately, this is the foundation of our health for us to actually combat compassion fatigue and burnout. So number one, this is how you build your foundations for resilience. Adequate sleep, mindful nutrition habits, regular body movement and exercise, and actively engaging in relaxation techniques that's not Netflix or Hulu, right? Like decompression that's actually not just self-soothing in that way. So as we can see right here, kind of when we talk about resilience, this is what is actually used at the Skorton Center for Health Initiative. So it's not what we're using here at Work Life or in Cornell Health. But what we see here when we talk about, being our best self, finding meaning, these are all wonderful things. Reflection, mindfulness, growth mindset, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. That can't exist if we're not sleeping, if we're not eating okay, if we're not breathing and relaxing. Because this is, you almost would look at this as like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These higher level thinking things cannot exist if our basic needs are not being met. So whenever you're starting to feel super overwhelmed, go back to your basics. When's the last time I slept well? When's the last time I ate a good meal that made me feel good afterwards? And I'm not the person who will ever dictate to you what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. I don't put morality towards food. But mindful eating is really important in thinking, is this food that's going to make me feel good afterwards? I hope so. And hopefully we're practicing the mindfulness that we know what foods are going to make us feel better. So moving our body, getting good sleep. And to hit that sleep point home, of course, there was a fantastic NIH research that was done on this. Modest sleep restriction may interfere with the enhancement of neurogenesis associated with learning processes. Prolonged sleep disruption may even affect the basal cell rates of cell proliferation and neurogenesis. These effects of sleep loss may endanger hippocampal integrity, thereby leading to cognitive dysfunction and contributing to the development of mood disorders. So when I say seriously go back to your basics, I really mean that. Because if you're sitting there going, my emotions are all over the place, I'm not feeling like I can regulate things like I used to. I used to feel more in control of my reaction. I'm feeling very reactionary rather than responding to people. I'm reacting to people. When's the last time you slept well? Okay. So now's the time for the cat pictures like I promised. So when you talk about balance, and I want to be clear, and I apologize to anyone who potentially has sensitive ears because there's no delicate way to say this. Even though I put balance on the screen, I will say balance is bullshit. It's bullshit. Balance doesn't really exist, and I really wish we'd shift away from the word balance to using rhythm. Our life has a rhythm, and seasons have reasons, right? We're all in different seasons of our lives. We're all going to be experiencing things at different flows. If someone's starting their career off, that's a different rhythm than if someone's winding their career down. If you have young kids at home, if you're starting out, if your kids are going off to college, if you have no kids at all, like that is a totally different rhythm. And so it's being mindful of what season of life are you in and what rhythm is that showing for you, right? So when we talk about keeping balance in your life, I want to talk about like keeping on top of that rhythm, right? Practicing diligent self-care. I have a friend of mine, she's this amazing, she's this fantastic poly woman of color therapist, and she's just super intense and awesome, and I just think she's really great. But she talks a lot about militant self-care. And she had this whole thing, she's like, I practice militant self-care. And I was like, and she's like, let me explain. She's like, no one's gonna fight for me but me. She's like, no one's gonna fight for me in a job but me, no one's gonna fight for me on the street but me, or anything. She's like, I have to fight for myself. When people schedule their priorities, they schedule their priorities on my calendar, not the other way around. She's like, so I do try to fight for myself, and I have to fight on my calendar for that. I have to fight in my own personal time, in my personal space for it. She's like, so I don't mean it to, and she's definitely not a military focused person, but for her, she's like, I need to be really diligent and militant about scheduling me first. And then I can fill up my calendar with all the other wonderful projects and things I want to do, right? So she nurtures herself by putting activities in her schedule that bring her sources of pleasure and joy, positive diversion, allowing yourself to take many escapes, that those things can relieve the intensity of work if you go for a walk at midday. If you have a schedule that gives you 15-minute breaks in the afternoon and the morning, I had a job like that, and it was like tea time, morning and afternoon, tea time. I'm a tea person. I'm not a coffee person. Never have been. But man, I will drink a pot of tea. So that was always my diversion of nothing going on, nothing happening, quiet, hot tea, hot cup on my hands, aroma of the jasmine. And it was my complete detachment for 15 minutes. And it did relieve the intensity of it for me. So it can be simple things, it could be big things, whatever you need. If you need to take a Friday off once every 3 months to go on a longer vacation on a weekend, totally fine, whatever you need. But know when you need to be alone and know when you need to be with people. We'll talk more about that. More great cat pictures. So chorus, transforming the negative impact of your work, finding more meaning, finding a challenge in it rather than a constant negative turmoil that you think you're experiencing. Like, where's the challenge? Where's the problem I can figure out? So, and also finding gratitude. If you folks are thinking of starting a gratitude practice, the most recent research that's been coming out of gratitude practices, them coming out of San Francisco, have been more around, usually people are like, oh, every day I should practice some gratitude. I should do a gratitude journal every day. And actually what the research has shown is that you start to actually become super shallow in what you write. Oh, I mean, I like my friends. Oh, like, you know, my partner's awesome. But if you do it once a week actually really focuses you to think more deeply about, why are you really grateful for this? You didn't think about it all week. Why are you grateful for it now? And actually one of my supervisor, we were talking, we had our holiday party yesterday, and I started the conversation at the table of like, what was the best compliment you received this year? And my supervisor was like, oh gosh, and she thought about it. She's like, honestly, she's like, it was this last week. She's like, my husband asked me, she's like, we went on a walk together in the afternoon, got bundled up and went for a walk. And she's like, and he kind of asked me oddly out of the blue, what do you like about me? She's like, I was kind of taken aback, like, what do you mean, husband of like 25 years? And he's like, no, really, what do you like about me? And she's like, oh, well, I love that you do this, and I love that you do that. I love that we have these great conversations about this, and we can always have intellectual debates at the dinner table. And he's like, thank you. And then he immediately started sharing with her, here's all the things I like about you. I love you and I like you. And she was just like, it was the best walk ever. But it's just those simple things about telling people also why we're grateful for them. Here's the things I like about you. Here's what I enjoy about being with you. She's like, it made my day, made my year, just to hear that from someone who I have slept next to for 25 years, right? One thing that we also need to talk about is getting medical treatment if you feel that it might help relieve some of the symptoms that you're experiencing, some of those physical manifestations that you may be having, seeking some medical treatment for those, or even just accessing some professional help if you feel like some mental health supports or something that would help you, right? Avoiding using self-medication regarding alcohol and drugs. I think that in our society, actually, I was raised in a very conservative faith growing up for probably about the first 30 years of my life. I never drank. And then from 30 on, I've caught up. So wine is delicious. How can you say no to that? But it comes to that place where I'm realizing that more and more as I started socializing with alcohol, that like very few times do we socialize without it. And so it's very easy for people who are really stressed, really feeling that compassion fatigue and burnout, to get into that space where like, oh, I just want to go decompress with my friends. And that involves maybe heavier amounts of alcohol. So, and it's a legal substance that we have that's readily available. We could go buy it right now at midday, right? So just being conscientious of our usage with that. Yeah. So when it comes to Ithaca, that's the thing. Yeah. Oh, sorry. The question was, what do we do when we have shortages and long wait times to access mental health services. And I would say, yes, I think particularly in Ithaca, that was one thing that I learned when I moved here a year and a half ago, that I was very surprised by the limited amount of resources that we had for FSAP for faculty and staff, but also even just in the community. And we know a lot of our students are accessing community resources because they don't feel like they're also getting enough access at CAPS. So I feel like our entire region is pretty much has saturated it out, right? When I try to reach out to get referrals for our residents, everyone's like, I'm booked, I'm booked, I'm booked. No access, no access. So one thing that I would really personally recommend is when we go back to some of these, that slide I had with the links about the national wellness organizations, the conversations that you can have with your PCP. If you can get in through some of those networks, I feel like sometimes they have a little bit faster check-in time than if you just reached out yourself. I had to call probably about 4 different places to even get one referral for a 12-year-old autistic child that one of our staff was like, I'm just trying to find someone, anyone. We just want to work on his behavior skills to keep him up to speed with his peers. And I was calling this center, that center, like kind of all over the place, and it's really discouraging. I won't sugarcoat that. I know that there's been efforts that have been made around discussing more about expanding FSAP. I think Michelle can speak more to that. And I think there's been more discussions around, how do we maybe increase like video counseling for folks who are like, I don't have time to go down to Cornell Health or go down to FSAP to do this, or I found a person, but they live out in Albany. So could I do video counseling as opposed to driving to Albany for a counseling appointment? Yeah, there's text counselors. I think that there's a varying range of quality when it comes to online mental health counseling. Some of it, some people have found really helpful as far as like, I just need some crisis management right now to talk me down. And then there's other folks where they're like, okay, this was pretty low level fundamental. This wasn't the sort of counseling I'm looking for. So I think it depends what the intensity is that you need and the level of support. But did you want to mention about the FSAP? Yeah.
So the faculty and staff assistance program just received approval to add an additional clinician to the services. They have 3 clinicians. They're going to have a 4th. That's a step in the right direction. E&I confidential counseling services is a service that we have available for all benefits eligible employees here at Cornell that a lot of folks don't know about. If you're not familiar with E&I, I encourage you to go to hr.cornell.edu and just search for E&I. In our follow-up email, we can also include a link to that. E&I gives you 3 free appointments with an area clinician through their contract and agreement. So there's some resources that we're really trying to increase awareness of that folks can tap into, and understanding that I think that they are not a one-size-fits-all solution for everyone. And I would add that for a lot of folks who are looking for counseling services who are raising children, the counseling services can feel very limited in this community, and I've experienced that personally with my daughter as well. So I hear you there. Does anyone have any awareness of some mental health resources that you would want to share or highlight in any way? Aubrey, I'm looking to you.
So I work in the benefits
So there's some options. I think for a lot of folks, they're like, I get my sessions and then I'm referred out. So I think trying to find continued counseling is definitely always a concern. But we're trying, as Michelle said, we're trying to make steps in the right direction regarding, it's not the first time I think that anyone has heard that, hey, we need more counseling, right? And I think for a long time, we only heard that coming for students. And I really love it when faculty and staff speak up and say, yo, 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 us too. Because I think that's, even if you took it from the perspective of we want to improve the student experience, I'm like, then focus on the well-being of faculty and staff. That is how you can improve a student experience. Okay. Y'all, I did not disappoint with these cat photos. This is a cat who can balance things on its foot. So you're welcome. So there was you can do a couple different balancing exercises that kind of help you with kind of thinking through what would be a good way to balance some things. You can think about one mini escape or diversion that works well, that restores you, that renews you. Maybe that's going away and having lunch with some friends like once a month that you rarely get to see. But every month you guys dedicate yourself to seeing that. You list one thing that brings you joy. You name 3 things that you feel grateful for today or once a week. And then who do you care about? And how do you reach out to them today? How do you actually call the person that you wanted to? Or how do you say, hey, I want to see you later today? Or hey, can I stop by your house? I just want to like give you a hug. You know, so there's a lot of things that we can think about. We can think about the things that make us laugh and things that make us feel connected to one another. The cat pictures of end. I'm sorry, everyone. But one thing that we talk about when we talk about finding this rhythm again, and once again, knowing that we're going through spaces where we're having high intensity at work or maybe less intensity at work, but hoping that we can always reconnect with our passions. I'm guessing that everyone in this room is not doing the thing that maybe was like their first declared major in college, right? Everyone's like, no. My first declared major in college was dance. Not a dancer. I was, but I had bad feet and couldn't keep going. I don't have that arch. I just have a straight flat foot. But what were the things that you could do if you weren't doing the work that you had and money was not an issue? What would you do? What would you engage in? What would you take a class in? What would you want to learn? I have been secretly wanting to take a writer's class for years. And I just haven't been getting around to do it because my whole entire exit plan for my entire life when I win the lottery is I'm going to move into a cabin in the woods and I'm going to become like the local village witch. I'm just going to write books. Like that is my plan. I just want to be a writer with good Wi-Fi. Like that's all I want. Me and my dog, the smell of campfire, like wafting through, it's just going to be beautiful. And that's what I love because I was born and raised in Alaska. And like, that's what feels like home and cozy and feels like peace, right? So what would you all do? Okay. The privilege of luxury. Yeah, you'd fill your things with things you want to do. Yeah.
When you're on vacation for a week and a half, really only 2 days on the weekend, and you've got to like crunch all the adult stuff.
Yeah, being an adult is work, and I don't like it. I bought a house for the first time. Figured I'm 39, I should probably like do something about that. So I bought a house and quickly realized, oh my God, I'm spending every weekend like cleaning my house. Like, why? What did I do? This was maybe a bad idea. And I'm trying to stay excited. I'm excited, but I'm trying to keep my excitement going, right? But what would you all do? I can wait, and I will. Do we got folks online who say something? Sorry? You would travel, okay. Money was no option. And you could do anything with your life, you'd travel, yeah. I remember once upon a time I wanted to be a reporter for National Geographic. I wanted to be a photojournalist. I wanted to travel and take photos. That was it. I was like, that was the extent of anything I wanted to do. Yeah. Yeah, and what is it about that you love? Making memories. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, piecing together genealogy, putting all the memories together, realizing that we're kind of all connected to something larger than ourselves. Dare we get spiritual? We're connected to something larger than ourselves. Yeah. I mean, these are the things that we would love to do that actually stimulate very different spaces of our brain, rather than the, yes, I take the paper, I write up the paper, yes, I submit the paper. Like, right? Like that doesn't feel as stimulating and joyful as creating something. Sometimes we love to create things. I think as humans, as Homo sapiens, we'd like to create things. We've been creating things on cave walls for a very long time. We love it. It's in our blood, it's in our DNA, right? So we all have hobbies, we all have things that we really enjoy doing, or we're curious about doing, or maybe we're like, I would maybe take a singing lesson if like no one ever heard me, and it could be like in a soundproof room with one person, maybe who was deaf and was teaching me, you know, like maybe that. But it's like, where do we take these first steps in trying to do those things? And we're like, oh, I've always wanted to learn French. I've taken numerous French courses. Every time I walk in, the person is always from Quebec, and I leave. I'm like, that is not the French I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to learn Parisian French. And so I still keep trying to like find the French class for me, right? So we all have these things, but we need to find those things that are restorative to us. And we need to identify those things that fuel us and intentionally engage with those. And when we intentionally engage with things that we find stimulating and fascinating, that touch us in a way and resonate in a way that our work doesn't, our compassion fatigue begins to fade. And one thing that I also want is that when we talk about, and we might get to this a little bit later, but I want to mention it now, we're going to have people in our lives and relationships in our lives that are restorative and that may not be restorative. And when I say not restorative, I don't mean that always in a negative. It could be you caretaking for an elderly parent. And that dynamic of it being like a equal to and fro of giving and taking, that may shift, and you may be giving a lot of time and energy in a space that they can't give back. So that could be a little bit more of a non-restorative relationship dynamic at that stage. And so knowing that you're a giver, I think everyone in this room is probably a giver because we're talking about compassion fatigue and burnout. If you're that giver, how do you find those times where you can identify and schedule in time with those relationships that do restore you? Is your marriage restorative? Why not? How can we make it more restorative? How can you talk about it? The partnerships, the relationships with your children, the relationships with your colleagues, maybe with your supervisor. How do you make a feedback discussion feel more restorative and energizing rather than really diminishing and deflating, right? How can we identify these restorative relationships and have more of them? So when we talk about balancing our souls, it's that we do need to, like, what is the place that is that peaceful place for you? That place that every time you go to, you're like, ah, this is it. I can relax. I can let my guard down. Walking in the woods? Was that you too? The lady lair. Yeah, having a space in your home that's like a dedicated you space. You control what's on the walls. You control what's in the space. You know, that's a wonderful luxury to have, right? Like, we know that not everyone has that kind of house space. We have something online?
Folks online correct me out. My bed.
Yeah, the bed is a beautiful thing. If you spend good money on a good bed. Yeah. These are places that, I mean, I've had people who tell me like church or have, or the woods. Like, there's all these places that I think are these cathedrals in a way to us, right? Like, these are the spaces that you go to when you're like, I just need a space to breathe. And also being in that space helps you kind of work out all the stuff that's spinning around in your mind, right? I know that for me, sometimes it is laying in my bed, and if I can't sleep, I know it's because like my brain's got something buzzing in there, right? Like, I got to be in the bonnet. And I'm like, okay, let's work this out. But I know that for me, one thing I've noticed the most, like, I have the most, I think for me, the most emotional spiritual breakthroughs for myself when I am moving my body and thinking at the same time. When I do almost like a walking meditation, like walking through the woods. Even if I'm just on an elliptical, just like thinking and just like, okay. Like, those are the things, if I can move and if I can really utilize that mind-body connection as I work through some things I'm thinking about, it really smooths it out. It's been really, really helpful. Recommend it for folks. But some things that you can do is find ways to acknowledge loss and grief. We all have experienced loss and grief in our lives, and it's not always just through the death of a loved one or the death of a pet. We can experience loss and grief through relationships that will never be what we hope they will be. I know that for me, I love my father. My father is very wonderful, but me and my father will never have the type of relationship I wish we had. He's never going to be a super close, loving guy. Do I know he loves me? Absolutely. But he's not going to be that guy who's going to call me every week, or like, he might cry on my wedding day if I ever get married. I don't know. I think me and Odin will just be partners for life. He's just always great. He loves me all the time. It's unconditional. But it's a space where my father's not super emotional. He's not going to be like, oh, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Like, he just doesn't say these things. He's not that person. So I have to grieve that loss of what I had in my mind, the image of what I thought that would be and hoped it would be. We lose a lot of things, and we lose a lot of people who are still very much alive. And we lose opportunities. We lose things that we think could have been the thing that would have made everything better. So acknowledging that loss, acknowledging that we maybe grieve that, is really valuable, because we don't want to hold that inside, right? Staying clear in our commitments to our personal career goals and to our personal commitments. Is the decisions that we're making, is the efforts that we're putting in at work, are they actually headed us to where we want to be? Are we saying yes to things that are actually very much far off from our career goals, and they're taking away time and distracting us from where we want to be? Focusing on what we can control is another big aspect as well. I think a lot of folks, we think about those shoulds and what could happen and why can't this be different and why can't X, Y, Z. It's like, what's in your sphere of control? You're going to drive yourself crazy if you think about the things you can't control. And of course, looking at situations as entertaining challenges and opportunities, rather than really negative experiences that just happen over and over and over, right? A lot of people are like, yes, Thanksgiving. And I'm like, yes, sometimes Thanksgiving is exactly like that with your family, right? You're like, be an anthropologist and observe. Be like, interesting, this is how people respond. All right. Trying to emotionally detach from some of the really triggering things. And the last one is connection. One, we need to talk out our stress. Talking out your stress with a trusted confidant, a trusted friend. Maybe you have a church leader, maybe whoever is in your life, who you feel you can really talk out and just lay it all out, so you can actually think clearly about what you want to do and where you want to go, strategize, and then you can make a choice from there. But nothing you say locks you in to a decision, right? Everyone needs that space to think. Building a positive support system is a number one thing. People that having more connections with people who diminish your stress rather than add to your stress. And there's times where I think we have to balance that between being a supportive, wonderful friend who helps our friends through hard times and loved ones through hard times, but also having that good boundary between, I can do this for a while, but I can't do this forever. So how can we help each other getting out of our slumps, right? Or getting connected to supports that can be their mental health supports. And of course, animals are a great source of comfort and affection. They're just heaven. And the blood pressure and your heart rate does decrease when you work with animals. So it's really great. So let's do a quick recap. 1, find someone to talk to. Do not isolate yourself. Please, please, please. Understand that your frustration is common and you're very much not alone. Making mindful health decisions for yourself. I don't think did I say get enough sleep? I think I did. Okay, want to make sure. Take some time away to clear your mind. If you are thinking that you might react to someone in a moment, just take a step back, just take a breather. Because you want to be able to respond to an issue or respond to a conflict. You don't want to react, right? Develop interests outside of work. You are multi-dimensional human beings. Not a single person in here is their job. I'm not my job. I love my job and I'm not my job. We are multi-dimensional people and we have wonderful things that we are interested in and want to engage in. So tap into those spaces of you that maybe, at least for a lot of folks I know, we have this amazing coworker in our office and she has 2 young kids. And she's like, honestly, I don't know what I do that isn't for my family or for my kids. She's like, everything on my schedule is either for my husband or my family or my kids. She's like, there's no me on my schedule. She's like, I don't even know what I like anymore. I've been doing this schedule for so long, I don't even know what I like anymore. And I was like, well, what do you want to do? She's like, I couldn't even answer that question. What do you like? I can't even answer that question. She's like, I've been in this mode for so long. So let's not forget this part of ourselves, right? Because this can happen not just with young kids or anything like that. This can happen with a lot of things when we get really roped into, maybe we have 60, 80-hour work weeks. Maybe we're working on massive projects and we're getting really sucked into a lot of things. Let's remember that we're multidimensional people. And identify what's important to you and prioritize it. Don't quit your job, buy a sports car, hire a lawyer, get a divorce, or have an affair. Please, please. Please don't blow up your life. This is very tempting. When you're feeling frustrated about your life, when you feel stuck, when you feel like it's the same thing day in, day out, when you're feeling like you just want to just tell everyone to F off, right? Like when you're just like, oh, I just want everyone to leave me alone. I want them to like just get out of my face. It's very tempting to be like, quitting today. I'm quitting with a meme and I'm out. You're like, cat photo, bye. But that's please, please, please don't. That's a reactionary thing, right? That's I don't feel content and happy in my life, so maybe if I blow up my entire life and start over, I'll like that. These are a lot of decisions that you can't undo very well. So please don't, in the heat of the moment or in the depth of feeling sad or feeling disconnected from what you're doing or feeling that sense of compassion, fatigue, and burnout, be really, if you can, reaching out to these people that you can talk to think strategically about what are the changes you could make that really would change things for you without blowing up your life, right? Don't engage in the blame game about who's to blame about all of this. Once again, that just is a game that no one wins, right? So once again, focus on your sphere of control and what you can do. Don't fall into the habit of excessively complaining with your colleagues. I find that there is I apologize, I have a potty mouth, this is just how I operate. The adage, don't shit where you eat, tends to always be applied to dating in the workplace, right? This is kind of that too. When you constantly dump at work, what does that create, right? It doesn't create an environment you want to keep coming back to. So how do we shift this, the obsessive negative complaining? And when I say this, I want to be super clear. I am in no way saying you should ignore problems. Absolutely address issues. But once you're trying to address the issue and things are in the works, try to focus on the things that actually you can focus on, or talk about anything else. Talk about things that are positive. Talk about things you're grateful for. There's a lot of other things that you can talk about with colleagues that will help you feel a better connection to them rather than complaining. Because usually that complaining acts as a bond, but it's a bond over negativity rather than a bond over something positive. So don't work harder and longer than is sustainable. Communicate your boundaries. Say when you've reached your max, or you're like, I can do this, but I can do this maybe for another month, and then I'm gonna start tanking. This isn't gonna keep going. So be clear about what your boundaries and your limits are and how you can communicate those effectively. Please don't self-medicate with substances. Don't neglect your own needs and interests, and please, please, please don't isolate yourself from your support network. I think that's one thing that we tend to see for a lot of folks is it's a very natural inclination that if you're feeling super down about your job, feeling super down about maybe the relationships that are feeling impacted because they're like, well, you always seem like so sad about your job. I don't want to hang out with you. And you're like, fine. And then you just start isolating yourself from your friends because you're like, well, I feel like I'm just negative, or they think I'm really unhappy and it's sad. So you start to isolate yourself. That is where things really get concerning. And this is the part that we want to avoid, right? We want you to feel connected to a support system. We want you to reach out. We want you to say when you need help, and we can get you to that, right? Michelle's group, me, FSAP, anything. Like there's a lot of resources that can connect you if you need help, especially if you're in a crisis. So are there any questions that folks have? Thank you so much for having me here, but is there any thoughts? Is that a hand or is that a touch? Oh, you're like, nope, just touching my face. Yeah. Yeah.
Both in person and online. We had a couple different comments about family life. So one individual talked about how she said, when am I supposed to sleep? I have young kids.
Yeah.
And how hard that is navigating that. Another person shared say, and I'm just summarizing,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that, you know, people who do not have children and may not even have a spouse or partner should deserve to invest in themselves and take time
Absolutely.
away from work. And I would just add that when it comes to workplace flexibility, flexible work arrangements, historically, a lot of that was aligned to supporting working families.
Oh, yeah.
And we've really shifted kind of our methodology here and our approach to workplace flexibility to include that no matter what your life circumstance is, it's really about, does it fit well for the job and you as a performer, not what's going on in your personal life, because it really should be a very equal access in that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. I can't tell you how many times I've been in positions where I worked the holidays because I didn't have kids. Every holiday. And they would, so then I couldn't even fly to see my family. That wasn't even an option anymore. But yes, I think that the whole idea, and I have students who say this all the time who are like late 20s, early 30s, they're professional programs. And they're like, how is it that I can do my laundry, make my bed, make all my meals, and get all my schoolwork done, and go to the gym and do all this? Like, how can I do all of it? I was like, you can't. And they're like, wait, what? I was like, that entire system was built on an archaic idea that you would have a spouse at home doing all the cooking and the cleaning for you and the child rearing. Of course you can't do it all. This entire system of 8-hour work days for like 5 days a week was entirely built on the premise that you had a joint system at home. I was like, it's outdated. It's archaic at this point, because I think modern day life doesn't function like that anymore. I feel horribly guilty as a dog mom because I feel like I epically fail him every day, because I'm like, I'm not at home with him right now. I would love flexible workplaces where I just had better Wi-Fi and I could just work from home with him on my lap. Like, it'd be great. All 80 pounds of him. He's huge. But yes, no, it's really discouraging. And it's always, when you have those experiences or you have those workplaces, and I know that Cornell's been doing a fantastic job engaging more and more with flexible workplace arrangements. If you feel like that's something that you're interested in, I highly encourage you to reach out to your HR reps about that. If there's other resources that you're wondering about that workplace flexibility, please reach out to your HR groups to see if there's more options available for that. Yeah. I think it depends. I think, I think it depends on what you work in. If you work in a certain businesses or companies, I think that they have a little bit more nimbleness to them. Like Microsoft can do larger things. They'd be like, oh, we're going to, like in Japan, they did the 4-day work week and productivity went up 40%. Like, you know, like just by shifting people's schedules down a day. I think the older the institution, such as Cornell, it's more of like, instead of a bouncy collie, we're more of like turning around a large elephant. You know, like progress might be a little bit slower. We're a larger institution. We have, I think as we talked about, there's more tape, there's more bureaucracy involved. That doesn't mean it's impossible. I think it just takes longer.
She provides consultations to employees on childcare, elder care, workplace flexibility issues, that type of thing. And having been here for about 12 years, I can tell you there's definitely been a shift in terms of the approach to workplace flexibility here. We train all new managers through the new supervisor orientation program on flexibility, and it used to be 12 years ago, convince us why this is important. And now when I'm presenting to supervisors, the questions are, how do I make this work amid my environment that I'm in, right? So I would say that there's still inconsistency across campus because of the unique issues that different colleges and units face. Obviously, what dining is doing is going to be very different than the College of Engineering, right? So we try to provide as many centralized services and guidance and training and all of that as possible. And certainly your local human resources representatives are great individuals that you can consult with. I would say in general, though, it's increasing. It's just maybe not at the rate that, you know, everybody would like. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Define the policy you're referring to.
There used to be a guideline, and people misinterpreted that as it being a policy that folks could take paid time away from work guaranteed to access the wellness program. It's not to suggest that folks can't take time away from work for purposes of wellness, but there has never been a unilateral policy on that, nor is there one right now. there's been some confusing communications about it through the years that has kind of led to that kind of philosophy. I think the wellness folks, our colleagues, and throughout human resources, what we talk about is how do we integrate flexible work arrangements so that folks can access wellness or things of their interest that have nothing to do with wellness, but are offerings, really cool offerings here in the community. So again, going back to that, no matter what you need flexibility for, how can we integrate that into the workplace? So there are some, I would say, just in addition to that, there's one or two, I think, colleges or units that have a guaranteed paid release time for accessing wellness, but that's very specific. And that program, that has not been growing over time. If anything, I feel like it's kind of backing away and folks are just being encouraged to embrace flexibility as much as possible.
You do training for existing managers, not just new ones?
Yeah, now I got to talk and type at the same time.
Yeah.
No, that's
The
totally
question-
fine.
the question was-
from
yeah.
the in-person audience, person in the audience here was, is there training available? And the answer is yes. So we will come in and there's a variety of levels. We'll do individual consultations with employees who are interested in flexibility. We'll do those with supervisors, and we've had leaders approach us saying, I want to have a more flexible culture in my organization. Help me think through what I can do. So it just depends on the needs of the college or unit. You would just get in touch with our office, either Diane or myself, and we would customize it based on kind of where you're at in your flex journey for your organization.
Yeah. No, you're fine.
So you being at the vet school, are you integrating the well-being into working with vet students?
Yes. Yeah, so my role is for faculty, staff, and students at the vet school. So we not only are we doing well-being integration into the DVM curriculum, we're also integrating more well-being into the resident experience, also into the teaching hospital that we have, the research tower, the diagnostic center. So it's going to be, so we're trying to very intentionally, I think as Michelle said, like a culture of well-being, which I think not just a culture of well-being, but it requires a culture of culture change. Is kind of where it's really headed to. So we're doing a very much a community health approach. We're not dividing up resources like this is a person who helps students, this is a person who helps faculty and staff. So it's all one big combined effort. It is the model that we're utilizing. It is just me. I am a army of one. I'm a lone wolf pack of one. But which actually, yeah. One, and the bonus of that is that I'm a full-time role, which is not a part-time role, which is great, but also that just requires a lot of collaboration, collaborating with work life, collaborating with the wellness center, collaborating with a lot of folks. I think the faculty are probably the toughest nut to crack in general, because a lot of what we talk about is also faculty accountability for problematic behavior, which I think, considering the tenure process and a lot of things that are around that, makes it very difficult, because it's not just a, how do we address culture here, but it's like the culture of higher education and the tenure and the faculty protections that a lot of folks have. So, yeah.
How do you support someone else who's experiencing burnout who doesn't want to or can't go to therapy or other support resources? So anyone that's a manager, either online or in this room, like that.
Okay. How can we support someone who is burnt out but doesn't want supports and doesn't want to utilize anything? So that is very much falls into the camp of they've quit and they stayed in my mind, right? I think when it comes to that, I don't think that can be so much like a colleague relationship. As far as you could, if it was a colleague, I would say like, do your best to actually be like, hey, how do we actually re-engage you again? Like, I really enjoy you being here. Can we talk? Like, you seem really down. I know you don't want to have and acknowledge it, name it. I know you don't want to access this resource over here. So what can we do? Like, don't just sit there and be like, oh, well, I know you don't want to access that, so okay. Like, don't play into the apathy section where we talked about that whole continuum. Don't let folks stay in this apathy. Be like, okay, well, push them into the intervention space where, okay, you don't want to utilize this resource. What could you utilize? What would help you feel more engaged? Because I know you don't want to keep feeling this way, right? No one wants to keep feeling that way. If you're a supervisor, I would imagine, and you have an employee that's feeling that way, my approach to that would be having a larger discussion around like engagement. Be like, hey, I really value you as an employee. I think that you've been here XYZ amount of time. We really want to keep you, but you seem really disengaged. What's going on for you? And don't just say, You're really disengaged. What can I do to get you back on? Right? Because that doesn't feel good. That's like, oh, okay, now let me perform engagement for you as an employee. Like, here we go. Because then they feel like their job's on the line. I think you would want to approach it from a space of, we value you and you don't seem happy. What can we do?